successful and a holding again at all times.
Be careful!
Government officials
The rain had been coming down on Prague for 3 days straight. The kind that doesn't wash a city clean, it just moves the dirt around. Somewhere under all that gray, in the mud of a riverbank, there's a story people say has been circulating for 800 years. They call it the Golem. Clay and stone. That's all it was supposed to be. Dead earth scraped off the bottom of the Letava and shaped into something with arms. Jewish occultism says you could take that lump of nothing and write or speak the right words over it, and it would sit up and look at you and do your bidding. Not alive, not exactly. Alive is a word for things that want something. The famous Golem belongs to the end of the 16th century to a rabbi named Judah Loa ben Bezalel, the Maharal, a learned man, and learned men are the most dangerous kind, because they're the ones who know just enough to open the door, but not enough to close it. The story goes that he made a servant out of mud, and the servant was strong. He was obedient, everything you'd want in a thing that you built yourself. That was the problem. It had no thoughts of its own, no fear, no hunger, no reason to stop. You can't reason with something that was never given a reason. It did what it was told until the telling ran out, and then it kept going. The way a bullet keeps going after the shooter has already changed his mind. So this rabbi had to take back what he gave, try to unmake it. Erase the word from its forehead, let it fall apart in his hands. So sit back, get comfortable. Today we're digging into the clay, digging into the story of the Golem, what it is, where it crawled out of, how the legend changed hands across cultures and centuries, and why its shadow still falls across every story we tell about the things we build to serve us. That's the part nobody wants to say out loud. We never stopped making them.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to The Dancing Toaster. This is Pastor Nelly, and this is the place where we wrestle with the intersection of faith and the unexplained. Today we are going back to basics. We're looking at a fascinating one that overlaps with tons of the things we've been talking about on the show lately. Today we're talking about a magical, man-made creature known as the Golem. Not Gollum from The Lord of the Rings, but the abomination fashioned from the river clay in Jewish occultism. But before we do, thank you for joining me once again. You could be listening to anything else right now, but you're here, and I can't thank you enough for that. I hope you enjoyed the late weekend drop. I've lost a lot of friends, but I keep making new ones, and we aim to misbehave. I hope some of y'all get that reference. In any case, I got my own little band of misfits forming over on Patreon. They are my toasties. I couldn't do this without them. Thank you guys for your love and support that keeps this going. As I said in that weekend drop, I'm almost ready to release the first episode of the Toaster Files, so be on the lookout for that. Thank you for all those who donate over on buymeacoffee.com/The Dancing Toaster. I appreciate your help as well as all those that have been scooping up some of the merch lately. Thank you. Everything helps. If you can't do any of that, don't worry, it's totally okay. Sharing the show on your social media is totally free, at least until Palantir and Flock take over the country. As always, links for everything are in the show notes. One last little ask. Even if you don't partake of The Dancing Toaster on YouTube, I would still love it if you could go over there and hit subscribe, trying to hit 1,000 subs before the end of the year. We hit a milestone over on Spotify this weekend. We finally got to 100 views. Thank you guys for showing love over there. You Apple folks need to get it together. It's only like 80 over there. I kid. Thank you all for showing love on all the various platforms that you partake of The Dancing Toaster. The show is growing because of you. Thank you. Now, it's time for me to shut up and for us to get into our discussion on the Golem.
Prague, 1580. The old city wears its history like a scar. In the heart of it stands the old synagogue, 700 years of prayer soaked into the stone. And above the prayers, an attic. Sealed. The staircase cut away generations ago. A rabbinical ban on the door like police tape nobody dares to cross. The legend says something sleeps up there in the dust. A giant, made of river clay and sacred words, built by a master of mythical arts to stop an annihilation or to bring one depending on who you ask. The story goes that when its work was done, its maker switched it off, laid the body down in the dark, left it waiting for the day they needed its dark power again. They called it a protector. But look closer. Protectors do not need to be sealed in attics. You don't cut the staircase to your guard dog. You cut the staircase to something you're afraid of.
So late 16th century Prague, the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II sat on the throne. A recluse obsessed with alchemy, astrology, and hidden wisdom, and the city had become a magnet for the brilliant and the strange. Astronomers mapped the heavens, alchemists tried to sweat gold out of lead. Science and occult mysticism drank at the same tables, and nobody asked to see credentials. Below the castle sat the walled Jewish quarter, a city inside the city with its own town hall, its own laws, its own courts, and one of the main centers of Jewish learning in Europe. The Talmud was in one room, Kabbalah in the next. The walls cut both ways. Barred from most trades, the community moved into money lending and became indispensable to Prague's commerce and resented for exactly that. Essential and despised as a bad combination, and every rumor out of the castle was a reminder of how fast a fragile peace could break. Into that quarter, the legend placed its so-called hero, Rabbi Judah Lowell ben Bezalel, called the Maharal. They called him the Lion of Prague, a towering intellect, a reformer of Jewish education, a public defender of his people in theological debate. In February of 1592, he was summoned to Prague Castle for an audience with the emperor. His own student, the chronicler David Gans, recorded that the meeting happened. He did not record what was said. Remember that name because we're going to come back to David Gans and what else he never wrote down. The legend would move into that empty room and furnish it. The legend alleged an increase in Jewish persecution, and the Maharal watched the pressure build and concluded that argumentation would not save his people this time, so they say he went looking for something that would. He found it in one of the oldest and strangest texts in Jewish occultism, the Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formation. Its core idea is that God spoke the universe into being out of the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, building reality the same way a mason builds with brick. In that tradition, letters are not symbols, they are elemental forces, the source code of the physical world. And the conclusion the legend drew from it was this: if the universe was built out of a divine language, then a man who masters the grammar can, in a limited way, create as well. So they believed a man given enough secret knowledge could do the one thing only God has ever done: speak life into dirt. The procedure followed from the premise. A human being was treated as a microcosm of the universe, so the four elements had to be ritually combined: earth for substance, water for cohesion, air for movement, fire for the spark. But elements were only parts, and the thing needed a power source. That meant meditating on the most secret names of God and pronouncing them correctly. Divine names handled as tools, sacred words repurposed as machinery. All of that had to be stored somewhere, and it went into the Shem, a slip of parchment inscribed with a sacred name, which was the conduit, the bridge between spirit and clay. In the deepest night, the Maharal and his two most trusted men slipped out of the sleeping ghetto. Nobody else knew the errand. Righteous acts do not usually require this much darkness, though. They went back to the bank of the Vltava where the river kept its clay, and they worked for hours sculpting a giant out of earth and water. Bigger than any man, blank as a grave. Then the real work started. They circled the body, reciting secret combinations of the divine names. Fire, water, air, each circuit loading the vessel a little more. Finally, the Maharal stepped up to the inert form. placed the Shem in its mouth and commanded it to rise, and legend says it rose. Some even say they named it Joseph, Yosahel in Yiddish. It stood taller than any man in the quarter. It never spoke. It never slept. It walked the ghetto at night. It watched the gates. In some tellings, it could make itself invisible, and in others, it could summon the dead when the situation called for it. According to legend, threats stopped being threats. The whisperers learned to whisper somewhere else. Plots against the community were discovered before they ripened, and the men behind them found themselves face to face in the dark with something that did not argue. For roughly a decade, they say the ghetto slept behind it. That's the strange thing about a monster on your side. For a while, it just looks like safety. But the storytellers built a flaw into it because a counterfeit always tells on itself. The golem had no soul. It could not reason. It could not show mercy. A man can shape clay, but he cannot breathe into it. What the legend described was not a man. It was a machine wearing a man's shape, capable of absolute, literal-minded obedience, but nothing else. Give it an instruction, and it would execute the instruction exactly through whatever was standing in the way. The incidents started small, property broken that did not need breaking, force applied where a word would have done. And a second feeling started mixing into the community's relief. It was fear. The ghetto began to understand what its rabbi had actually done. He had not given them a guardian. He had moved a loaded weapon into the neighborhood, and the only safety on it was his own memory. Because the golem was a work, and work is forbidden on the Sabbath. Every Friday afternoon, the Maharal removed the Shem from its mouth, so the thing lay inert through the holy day. But they say one Friday he forgot. That's all it took. One lapse, one tired man, one busy evening. The entire system of control resting on the attention span of a single human being. It was bound to happen. The only question was when. The golem's borrowed power ran unchecked into the holiest day of the week. Divine energy with no task to spend itself on, and it did not idle, it curdled. The creature tore through the quarter like an explosion in slow motion, raw, unthinking fury. The community that slept safe behind its protector barricaded its doors against it. Then the rampage built toward the unthinkable, and the golem went for the synagogue itself, the thing animated with holy names assaulting the house of the holy name. Even the legend cannot help telling the truth there. That's what borrowed fire does. It burns down the house. The Maharal ran from the service to face the thing he made. On the golem's forehead glowed a word. Emet. Truth. He reached up and erased the first letter. Emet became Met. Truth became death. The light went out of the creature's eyes. The giant folded and came apart into a mound of lifeless earth on the synagogue floor. The body was not destroyed. In the legend, the remains were carried up into the attic and laid in the Geneza, the repository where worn-out sacred writings were stored, because anything bearing the divine name cannot simply be thrown away. They filed it with the scripture. The Maharal forbade anyone but his own successors to go up there, and the story holds that the golem waits in the dust to this day, ready to be raised if the Jews of Prague call on it again. At least, that's what the legend says. A hybrid telling of it, as it has shifted much through the ages, a point we'll touch on throughout, but notice what it never does. It mourns the monster, it excuses the maker. It files the rampage under bad luck and then moves on. It never once asks whether the rabbi should have built the thing at all. So now it's time for our full investigation. The legend claims a 16th century miracle and a public one, a clay giant walking the streets of Prague, saving a community, and later rampaging through a ghetto.
You know, events like that should leave a paper trail.
Oh, welcome back, Doc. Today is a little less controversial, so I guess you can join me. Yes, events like this should leave a paper trail, so historians went looking for that trail, and what they found was silence. What are you talking about? Define silence. Oh, Vinny, welcome back as well, sir. Well, start with the Maharal himself. A prolific author, thousands of pages on philosophy and ethics and Jewish law, and he never once mentioned the Golem. No Golem, no Shem, no word. His students also said nothing, nor did his contemporaries. The eulogies at his death in 1609 also, nothing. His tombstone would have been a nice place for a final little cryptic Easter egg, but nothing. And remember that name I told you to hang on to?
David Gans?
Yes, David. His own student and chronicler, Gans wrote down the audience at Prague Castle in 1592. He thought a meeting with the emperor was worth recording. He wrote extensively about his teacher and about the events of that community. And you mean to tell me this man wrote nothing about the Golem? Not a peep, Vinny. In all his notes, we don't get a single word about this.
Now that's the part that ought to land the hardest. It's one thing to say the record is thin, it's entirely another to have the exact witness you would want actively writing on the exact subject in the exact place, and you get nothing.
For more than 2 centuries after he died, not a single known Hebrew work, including works published in Prague itself, connects the city's most famous rabbi to its most famous legend.
So the people closest to the miracle never heard of it.
That is the kind of clue that closes cases. Wait a minute. Or it's the kind of thing you don't write down. My Nona's whole family came out of Europe, and there's stuff nobody put on paper for like 50 years. You think a rabbi puts a working Golem in the community minutes? You never disappoint, sir. That is a fair instinct, and I want to answer it because you are half right. An empty file does not always mean an empty story. While the chronicler stays silent, folklore often keeps its own ledger, fireside tales on long winter nights and such. For 2 centuries, the story likely simmered there, fragmented and local, nothing like the epic we know. That's what I'm talking about. But here is the other half. Something simmering in kitchens is not the same as something that happened in the streets. And the version you know is not the one simmering. It is the epic, and the epic has a birthday. The 1830s, Europe catches folklore fever. The Brothers Grimm have shown the world that old tales matter, and every nation starts digging up its own. Jewish writers join the digging, and in an era of massive social changes, collecting folk tales becomes an act of cultural preservation, a way of saying we too have a heritage. And here the Golem of Prague leaves its first footprint on a printed page.
What year was that?
1837. It was a novel called Spinoza by the German Jewish author Berthold Auerbach. 10 years later, the Prague journalist Leopold Wiesel publishes his version in an 1847 collection called Sepurim.
1837, you say? Didn't the creator of the beast die in 1609?
Yep, 200 and some years after the Maharal died, his most famous deed was born. Okay, but what's in those versions? You keep skipping past what's actually in them. They are short, the details wander, and the core is finally in ink. A great rabbi of Prague creates a clay servant, the servant becomes a threat, and that's it. Wait a minute, that's it? Yep. Some tellings include a missing child, various accusations, alleged rescues, but we don't see any of that in Auerbach nor in Wiesel. The original printed Golem story has no persecution plot in it at all. The threat comes from the inside of a house, not a neighborhood. Not to mention the plot was not even original to Prague.
Of course it wasn't.
The storytellers were working from an older tradition, and that tradition named a different man, Rabbi Elijah, the Baal Shem of Chelm, a 16th century contemporary of the Maharal in a town in Poland. Accounts of the Golem of Chelm were being recorded by folklorists as early as 1674 and elaborated by 1740s, long before anyone wrote a word about a Golem in Prague. Wait a minute. 1674, that's 160 years earlier. And the Chelm stories are not about protection. The Chelm Golem grows too large and too powerful, it becomes a danger to its own creator, who has to struggle to shut down the thing he made. So not a guardian, but a mistake.
So the warning came first?
Yep, the warnings came first. The hero story came much, much later.
Stories often start as cautionary tales and get promoted later on.
The Chelm legend almost certainly served as the direct template for Prague. Folklorists have a name for this, narrative migration they call it. A story pulls up stakes and moves to a better address. In the 19th century, Prague was becoming a focal point of Jewish nostalgia and pride, and it had the obvious candidate for a starring role. So the Golem left Chelm and moved in with the Maharal in Prague, and somewhere on the road the cautionary tale got the promotion the good doctor's talking about. The mere mistake became a savior figure.
Which raises the only question worth asking about.
What's that, Doc?
The question is not that the story moved, the question is what made an entire century want to sand the warning off of it.
A scattered pile of folktales does not become an epic on its own. It needs a master storyteller, and the legend found one in the last place you'd look. Man, I hope this gets better, because y'all are really ruining this thing for me. Well, a Polish rabbi at the turn of the 20th century who would end his days in Canada is where we go next. His name was Yudel Rosenberg, another scholar of Jewish law, deep in Kabbalah, deep in folklore, and a man who walked the line between history and pious fiction like he knew both sides of the street. In 1909, he published the book that made him and the Golem immortal, Niflaot Maharal, The Wonders of the Maharal.
And how much of what people think they know comes out of that one book?
Well, effectively, all of it. The name Joseph, the decade of loyal service, the climactic deactivation, and the so-called blood libel as the motive. Wait a minute. He made it all up? Yep, he made it all up, Vinny. That's where the victimhood crept in and the alleged rescue came from. It wasn't in Auerbach nor Wiesel. It was not in Chelm. Rosenberg welded it on in 1909.
Man, this story changed a lot.
It did, because there are multiple stories going around. We don't know if any of these actually tried to make a golem out of clay, but they molded the story like clay to fit their time. One of the biggest shifts was, once the creature exists to answer an accusation from outside, the maker stops being the problem and becomes the hero. The moral weight slides right off him and onto the accusers, and that is how a cautionary tale gets promoted to a rescue narrative in one move.
And people have been calling that move ancient tradition for hundreds of years.
But Rosenberg did not present it as his own work, and this is where it turns into a genuine case. He made a sensational claim. There may be hope for this case yet. Well, the book he insisted was a faithful transcription of a long-lost 16th century manuscript written by an eyewitness. He says it was the Maharal's own son-in-law, Rabbi Yitzchak Katz. I don't know if I said that right. He was an eyewitness? That's what they say. He even named the source, right? He said he found it in the Royal Library of Metz.
Name the library too. That's confidence.
And it changed the category of the thing. No longer folklore. Now we got a primary source, right? The text read like one. Names, dates, transcribed conversations, granular details with the ring of a deposition. The book was a sensation precisely because it claimed the authority of fact. It offered readers a window straight into the golden age of Prague, and it seemed to confirm in an eyewitness's own hand that the city's greatest legend was true. Wait a minute. What you mean, seemed to? Seemed to, yes. The scholars started pulling those threads, and the whole magnificent coat came apart. Just like the Zohar from a few weeks ago, they tried to claim it was ancient.
Start with the manuscript.
Rosenberg was asked repeatedly to produce the 16th century original he claimed to have transcribed. He never could. I mean, maybe he lost it. Things get lost all the time. Then the source. Exhaustive searches turned up no evidence that the Royal Library of Metz ever even existed. Oh man, this is the bunkest roller coaster I've been on.
So the eyewitness account came out of a library that never was even built.
Then the text testified against its own alibi. The book is riddled with anachronisms. Wait, what are those again? Well, concepts and titles and events a real 16th century author in Prague could not have known. It uses rabbinic honorifics that were not in use in the Maharal's lifetime, but were standard in 19th century Poland.
Which is where again?
Which is right where Rosenberg happened to be educated.
Well, there it is. I'm feeling good about this one today.
Come on, Doc, don't rub it in. It is like an eyewitness account of the Alamo that mentions the parking lot. Shout out to the few friends I still have left in San Antone. And the language put in the last nail. Scholars showed the Hebrew and Aramaic did not match the 16th century. The grammar was wrong, the syntax was wrong, the vocabulary was all wrong. What it does match is the Yiddish inflected Hebrew of 19th century Eastern Europe.
A modern author writing in an ancient costume with his own fingerprints on every page. Look at that.
Exactly, Doc. The verdict is unanimous. Scholarship today universally recognizes Niflaot Maharal as pseudepigrapha, a brilliant literary hoax. Rabbi Yudel Rosenberg was not the transcriber of the Golem of Prague, he was its author. Oh man, so the whole thing is fake? Yep, the Golem of Prague, as the world knows it, was not born in the 16th century. It was written in 1909 by a master storyteller headed for Montreal. Which leaves the last question a detective ever asks: why?
Was it money?
You love going there, but as usual, it doesn't fit. Rosenberg was a pious man, a defender of tradition in an age of galloping secularism. Fame and fortune are not the profile here. His goal was almost certainly what his defenders would call a holy fiction. But I want to call it what it was: a forgery. A fabricated eyewitness, the words of a dead man invented and sold as testimony. But I thought you were suggesting that it was at least sincere. He almost certainly was, and you have been listening to the show long enough to know that sincerity was never the question. Sincerity is not a valid measure of truth. He likely saw himself as an heir to the Maharal, another man facing a crisis for his people, with Jewish identity squeezed between assimilation and nationalism, and his story offered a potent fantasy. A community that, facing alleged annihilation, does not beg outside powers for help. It turns inward to its own text, its own letters, its own sages, and builds its own savior. Rosenberg felt the same need his hero felt: the need to make a protector.
And the parallel ain't subtle.
The Maharal of legend used river clay, Rosenberg used ink. The rabbi in the legend reached for a forbidden shortcut and lost control of it. The rabbi in Montreal did exactly the same thing. He built a lie to serve the truth, and the lie got loose. It outgrew him, walked out of his book, and is walking still. So I guess in a way he wrote two golems. He did, but this one never crumbled.
Which is the one piece of this I would put on a plaque. The most durable lies are the ones told with the best intentions.
I mean, honestly, it's a great story. I get why it worked for so long. Well, I think it's a little more complicated than that, Vinny. The story worked because the audience wanted power. Ultimate, world-altering power. What are you talking about? The fantasy was never that heaven would deliver them. The fantasy was that a man with esoteric knowledge could. The savior in this story does not come down, it comes up out of a riverbank at midnight by dark ritual. When people are frightened enough or ambitious enough, even the forbidden can be dressed up as devotion. The legend took an occult act and tried to baptize it. It put a conjuration in a prayer shawl and called it faith. And to carry that story, it performed one last operation. It rebuilt the hero. It took the historical Maharal, the rationalist philosopher and educational reformer, and quietly filed those facts down. It amplified his mysticism. It leaned on that unexplained meeting with an occult-obsessed emperor. The sage became a sorcerer because the myth needed one. So you're saying the legend did him dirty? That recasting did not honor the Maharal. It slandered him with flattery. It took a normal teacher, remade him as a conjurer, and called that a tribute.
Now I'm going to say the quiet part. The man could not object. He had been dead for 400 years and people had been putting words and deeds in his mouth for 200 of them.
That is the unmasked truth of the Golem of Prague. It is the deeply human response of a community under pressure, reaching back across 2 centuries to a golden age that never quite existed. And out of the clay of their own memory, anxiety, and hope, they forged themselves a monster. Then they told themselves it was a guardian. And if that pattern sounds familiar, it should, because it is the same pattern as the thing that made the Golem in the first place. Kabbalah is the Golem. Not metaphorically, but structurally, a body of teaching assembled late and backdated to an authority who was already centuries in the ground. The Zohar surfaces in 13th century Spain, as we talked about, and presents itself as the teaching of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, a sage who died more than 1,000 years earlier and never got a vote in it. Same move Rosenberg made 700 years apart. Take a real man who cannot object, hand him a secret he never taught, and let the antiquity do the persuading, because a technique for operating the divine name has to come from somewhere older than you. Nobody accepts a shortcut to becoming a god that was invented last Tuesday, so they built a lineage the same way the rabbi built the servant. Out of the right materials, in the right order, with the right words over it, and when it stood up, they called it tradition. Kabbalah is evil and awful, and so too is the Golem it allegedly gave birth to, but we're not quite done yet. A story that useful does not stay in one community. The central anxiety, a man creating life and losing control of it, well, it was too big to stay in the ghetto. In 1818, its dark twin arrived dressed in the new language of science. Wait a minute, are you talking about Frankenstein? I am. More specifically, Frankenstein's monster. Everyone forgets the doctor's name is Frankenstein. There is no documentary evidence Mary Shelley ever heard the occultic Jewish legend. She did not need to. The two stories are parallel myths. Both feature a creator trespassing on territory that was never his. Both feature a powerful, childlike creature rejected by its maker and feared by the world, and both end in tragedy.
Now, the useful reading of that is flattering to one side.
It is. The standard reading says the Maharal creates out of selfless faith and Frankenstein creates out of selfish pride. One act deemed sacred and one profane. The rabbi absolved, the scientist condemned. That sounds about right. Right? It does not survive contact with the acts themselves. 2 men, 2 workshops, 2 attempts at the one thing that was never theirs to do in the first place. 2 creatures that slipped the leash. The motives differ, the trespass is identical. They are both playing God.
Good intentions do not change what a locked door is for.
I like that, Doc. I think I'm going to take that. Frankenstein is not the golem's opposite. Frankenstein is the golem with the mask off. The scientific age simply stopped pretending the act was holy, and then the movies got a hold of it. They did. The 20th century gave the golem a face. German expressionist cinema put it on screen in Paul Wegener's 1920 film, and when the expressionist directors fled to Hollywood, they took that visual language with them. Watch Boris Karloff's monster in the 1931 Frankenstein, the lumbering walk, the immense frame. That's basically the golem. That is Wegener's golem 10 years on. The clay man of Prague taught Hollywood how a monster moves.
But Hollywood did not cast him as the hero.
They did not. They borrowed the golem to play a monster. The movies read the story correctly, though, on the first pass. Literature took it somewhere darker, though. Gustav Meyrink's 1950 novel turned the ghetto into a dreamscape and the golem into a psychic presence. Then came comic books, fantasy novels, political cartoons where the golem stands sometimes for protective strength and sometimes as a warning about force that answers to no one. The warning keeps trying to reassert itself. It was the original story after all, which brings the case to the present because the golem is the primal parable of humanity and its technology, a 400-year-old warning label that we keep framing as an achievement. The first lesson is what researchers now call the alignment problem. The maker gave an instruction. The creation executed it literally, and the literal execution brought chaos. How do you make a powerful non-human system pursue your values and your common sense rather than the raw letter of its code? Oh, well, what's the answer? Nobody has one. Oh man, but of course they keep building anyway. Yep, they keep building anyway. The second lesson is unintended consequences. The golem was a solution that became a bigger problem, which is the standing bargain of all powerful technology. We build it to fix one thing and spend the rest of our days managing what the fix broke. The last lesson is the deepest, and here the system convicts itself, so I want to be careful how I say it. You will hear people explain the golem by saying it had a nefesh, not a neshama. I'm not going to use that line, and I want to tell you why, because 2 things are wrong with it. First, nefesh is not some lower spark. Nefesh is the soul word. Genesis 2:7, God forms man from the dust, breathes into his nostrils, and the man becomes a living soul, a nefesh chaya. That is the whole event. So saying a thing had a nefesh and no soul is saying it had a soul and no soul.
Well, what's the second thing?
The second thing is where the tiered scheme comes from in the first place. The ladder of nefesh, ruach, neshama, with a low rung for animal life and a high rung that faces God, is not a plain reading of Scripture. It is the Zohar's model of the soul. It's Kabbalah's own anthropology. So the explanation for the golem comes from the same book that built the golem. Exactly, Vinny, meaning the system has an answer ready for the obvious objection. Ask a Kabbalist whether the golem was a person and he will tell you no, it only ever received the lowest rung, which sounds like humility right up until you notice what it's actually doing.
It's a disclaimer.
It is. The system that says a man can imitate the creative act of God also builds in the fine print, explaining why the imitation always comes out defective. It gets to claim the power and pre-excuse the failure in the same breath.
Well, now that's the oldest sales structure there is. The product works, and if it does not work, that's covered on page 9.
Yep, so I'll say it in plain English instead of theirs. The golem had animation without life, motion without breath in it. Every function of a living thing except the one that would have made it answerable to anybody. It could execute, and it could not weigh. It could obey with no conscience anywhere in the mechanism, and that gap is not a flaw in the technique. It is the entire distance between making something and being God. And I think they knew it. That's what you're saying, they knew it going in? Well, they wrote it down. That is what I cannot get past. The doctrine says the thing you build cannot receive the part that matters, and they build it anyway, and they called the shortfall a mystery instead of an answer. We tell ourselves the golem is a story about careful engineering. Read it again. It is a story about a man who was certain he could control what he summoned, certain his hand would stay on the switch, right up until the Sabbath it slipped.
And every builder of every powerful thing has carried that same certainty.
The certainty is the oldest part of the story, Doc, older than the clay. The legend's final lesson was never really about the monster. The golem had no malice in it. It couldn't. Malice requires a will, and this thing had none.
So where does the evil live in this tale?
Every ounce of it in this story belongs to the man involved, to the maker who reached for power that was not his and told himself the emergency made it righteous. But I thought he was just trying to save people. Well, that's what the legend tries to do, and the legend wants you to pity the rabbi. Fine, pity him, don't acquit him. The Sabbath rampage was not an accident that happened to a wise man. It was the invoice for the whole project, and it was always going to arrive.
And I'll meet you there, which may surprise some folks. I do not believe a word of the mechanics. I do believe that a man who decides he can borrow the one thing that was never his to borrow ends up standing over something he has to undo. You don't need the clay to walk for that to be true.
Our creations, whether river clay or digital code, will only ever be as wise and as careful as we are. And frankly, we are not wise enough. We never have been. But we're not quite there just yet. Now, I said it plainly in the Kabbalah episode, and I'll say it again. Even if the story was true, it's rooted in Jewish occultism, and to me, it is nothing more than an attempt to manipulate the divine. But wait a minute, they ain't calling on anybody else. There's no demon in this story. It's God's name they're using. Well, first, it's their warped idea of God, but in any case, I think that's what makes it worse, not better. If a man steps outside the covenant and summons something foreign, at least everybody can see what he's done. What we have here is a man using the covenant's own vocabulary as an instrument. He is not addressing God. He is handling God's name the way you would handle a tool and expecting a result to follow from correct procedure. Again, even if the story has no credible evidence, the intentions of Kabbalah found in the Zohar are very real. Prayer is petition. Kabbalistic ritual is procedure. Prayer submits a request to a person, but procedure assembles the right components in the right order and expects the outcome to arrive on its own. And if it does not arrive, you conclude the technique was wrong rather than the answer was no. So you're saying these guys thought they found a mechanism? I am saying the story only works if there is a mechanism, Vinny. Take that away and there's nothing left to tell. The whole thing depends on the assumption that the name of God will perform when it is deployed correctly. They do believe that, and I do not know how to describe that as anything other than treating the holy as a lever. And that instinct has a track record, and it did not go well for ancient Israel in the Old Testament when they treated the ark like a magic god box. Wait, that sounds familiar. What are you talking about? I'm talking about 1 Samuel 4. Israel gets beaten by the Philistines, and instead of asking why, they send to Shiloh for the ark and carry it into the camp. They never repent, they never inquire of God, they never ask whether he intends to go with them. They just fetch the object to use, to twist his arm. The reasoning is that the box has been present at victories before, so if the box is present again, the victory follows. God will have to move because they brought the box that represents his presence.
Oh, and the shouting. Don't leave out the shouting.
And the whole camp shouts so loud the ground shakes, and the Philistines hear it and say, a god has come into the camp. Even the pagans read it as a device arriving, and then Israel loses even worse than before. 30,000 men, and the ark itself gets captured. The object went into enemy hands because the object was never the point. But wait a minute, didn't God defend it once it got there? Like Dagon fell over, right? Ah, he did, and that part ought to settle the matter. God defended his own honor in a Philistine temple without a single Israelite present, which tells you the power was never on loan to whoever was holding the handles. It was never Israel's to deploy. What was true of the ark is true of the names. And then there is Uzzah, 2 Samuel 6, the cart, the oxen stumble, a man puts out his hand to steady the ark, and he dies for it.
Now that one bothers people.
It should, and I would say that the thing that killed Uzzah was not the touch, it was the cart. The whole procession was already running on a Philistine method rather than the one God gave, and by then the assumption had become so ordinary that nobody in the parade noticed the holiest object in Israel was being transported the way the enemy had shipped it back. Uzzah reached out because he had come to believe the ark needed him. So you're saying the sin was getting too comfortable with it? Saying the sin is handling. The consistent pattern in Scripture is that God will not be operated. He gives His name. He gives His presence. He gives His word. And every time somebody tries to convert that gift into a technique, it goes badly. And it goes badly precisely at the moment the technique appears to be working. Kabbalah does the same thing with God's name that Israel did with God's ark, and I do not use this word lightly. It does it wickedly. It takes the letters of the divine name and treats them as components and asks what can be assembled if they are arranged correctly. The ark was at least a physical object somebody could carry by mistake. The name is the self-disclosure of God. It is how He tells you who He is. Turning that into an operating instruction is not a smaller version of the ark problem. It, I think, is the larger one, so the popularity of this story concerns me. A man performs an occultic procedure, the clay stands up, and everybody in the story spends the rest of it discovering the thing was never under his authority in the first place. He could start it, he could not govern it.
Now that I will grant you, and I want folks to hear me granting it, even inside the tradition that tells this story lovingly, nobody ever writes the scene where God says, "Oh, go ahead." That scene don't exist. They skip straight from the man deciding to the clay standing up.
That's right, Doc, and the more I read of the Talmud and the Zohar, it doesn't surprise me they never see the problems. And before we go any further, I have to back up because I've been letting you think this started in the Middle Ages. Well, it didn't.
How far back we going?
The Babylonian Talmud, 6th century. The Zohar is Spanish, 13th century Castile around 1280, but the instinct behind it did not start in Spain. It came out of the East. The Babylonian Talmud is full of demons and incantations and ideas not found in the Jerusalem Talmud and not found in Temple Judaism. And that is not just a reading. Archaeologists have pulled thousands of Aramaic incantation bowls out of Babylonian soil, written by Jews in Jewish Aramaic using the divine names and quoting scripture, and buried upside down under thresholds to trap spirits. Wait a minute, real ones? Like, you can go look at them? Not the spirits, but the bowls. Yes, museums have them. Same centuries as the Talmud, same region, same community.
That's not folklore, that's somebody's dirt.
That is somebody's dirt, and here's why I brought it up. The oldest Golem story in existence is not Prague. It is not even Chelm. It is in Sanhedrin 65b. Get out of here. Rava creates a man, that is the text, and he sends this man to Rabbi Zierah, and Zierah speaks to him, and the man cannot answer him. And Zierah says to him, "You are from the companions. Return to your dust."
Now hold on, say that last part again.
Return to your dust.
So the very first version of the story, the oldest one anybody has, ends with a rabbi looking at the thing and unmasking it on the spot?
Right on the spot. No decade of service, no rescue, no hero. He speaks to it, it cannot speak back, and he sends it back to the ground. And 2 pages later, Sanhedrin 67b, you get Rav Hanina and Rav Ashea sitting every Sabbath eve studying Sefer Yetzirah, and they create a calf. And they eat it. Wait a minute, they ate it? Yep, they ate it. That's one of the weirdest things anybody said on this show, and I was here for the Bell Witch. But look at the name in that passage, Sefer Yetzirah, named out loud in the Talmud, being used as a manual to make a living thing. That is the same book the legend puts in the Maharal's hands in Prague 1,000 years later. Same text, same procedure, same assumptions. That a man who masters the grammar can do the one thing only God has done.
So the Zohar did not invent this?
Nope, the Zohar systemized it. It took something that was already sitting in Babylonian soil and built a cathedral on top of it. But I want to be fair about one thing in that Talmud passage that cuts against me. To his credit, Rabbi Zierah does not celebrate what Rava made. He does not ask how it was done, nor does he ask for one. He simply returns it to dust. In any case, the oldest Golem story we have ends exactly the way every single one after it ends. Somebody makes a thing, and somebody has to unmake it. They just stopped listening to their own text. At its core, I see a symbol of the human appetite to create, to reproduce the one act Scripture reserves for God, and in nearly every version it also works as a warning about what happens when that appetite is satisfied. The Golem is useful right up until the moment it is not, and there's no stage in between. And I want to show you more of that because there is an older story than Prague, not as old as Babylon, but remember I kept mentioning the Helm accounts. They were being written down by 1674, 160 years before anybody printed a word about Prague. It's time I tell that story, and this is the one that actually scares me. Helm, ain't that in Poland or something? Yes, Helm is in eastern Poland in a serious center of Jewish learning. The man at the center of it is Rabbi Elijah, called the Baal Shem or Baal Shem, the master of the name. Baal in his name tells me all I need to know about him. And if you're thinking, oh, Baal just means master. Master is not a word anybody uses about prayer, that's for sure. You do not master a person you are asking, you master a technique. That title is still a job description in my book, and the job is operating the name, which is still no bueno. This guy had a reputation for power, not for teaching, for power. And a man with that reputation has an audience, and an audience has expectations, which is worth remembering when we get to what he was doing in his attic. It starts in the middle of an unbearably hot summer when the rabbi begins shutting himself in the attic of his own home for hours at a stretch. The neighbors figure he's escaping the heat, and that would be a reasonable thing to figure, except that his assistant is being sent up these stairs over and over with armloads of clay and buckets of water. Oh, clay and water, clay and water. And finally the poor man is worn out, and he sits down on the steps, and he leans over and puts his eye to the keyhole. Then what? Nothing. It's black. The rabbi had already thought of it and covered the keyhole from the inside with a thick sheepskin.
Well, now, hold on. I do not need to know one more thing about this story. That man knew what he was doing, needed hiding. He hid it from his own household. He hid it from his own assistant, who was carrying the materials up the stairs for him.
I agree. That's a detail I can't get past either, Doc. Word gets around town that something is happening up there, and on the 7th day, the door finally opens. Behind the rabbi comes a clay giant, silent with rough features that only kind of suggest a human face, and fixed to its forehead is a parchment with one Hebrew word on it, emet, truth. And the rabbi announces it, this is a golem. I made him to help us, to lighten our labor, and perhaps to protect us. Perhaps to protect us. He tacked that on at the end? He did. And the town was thrilled, though. The legend says it worked. For a while. The thing never got tired, never complained, and never stopped. Hauled the water, split the wood, swept the yards. The trouble was that he was dangerously literal. He was not a creature of God. He was the work of human hands. There was no reason in him, no grasp of context, no ability to understand human speech in anything but its narrowest possible sense. So one day the rabbi is in a hurry. He tells the golem there is no water in the house. Go to the well and get some water. So the golem goes to the well and gets some water. He comes back, and he goes again to the well, and comes back, and goes and comes back, pouring it through the kitchen window each time over and over because he was told to bring water, and he was never told when to stop. The rabbi comes home from the synagogue to a flooded house. That's kind of funny, actually. I got some weird AI pics from ChatGPT when I wasn't specific enough. Oh, well, we'll get to that soon enough, but it stops being funny. Another day, the rabbi's wife asks the golem for firewood. He doesn't understand her, so she points out the window. She points at the forest. Well, the golem leaves. By evening, she is running to her husband in a panic because the golem is gone and nobody can find him. The rabbi goes out after him, and he stops where he stands because the entire forest was gone. All of it. The clay giant standing in the middle of mountains of logs that had been a forest that morning. What the heck was he building, a data center or something? Every tree was down. Every tree. She pointed at the forest, but she did not say how many. The rabbi understood right then that he had crossed a line. He prayed all night. By dawn, he knew what he had to do. That night, while the thing lay still in the barn, he walked in quietly, and he took the parchment back out of the clay, and the moment those letters were gone, the body lost its shape, and the whole thing came down in a heap. Wait a minute, there's another version, right? What's the famous one? Ah, well, the other version is more famous and a lot more elegant. He does not remove the parchment. He reaches up and he wipes away the first letter. Emet, truth, becomes met, death, and the golem crumbles into dust. One letter. Yep, 3 letters make a living servant, 2 letters make a pile of dirt. And the difference between them is a single stroke that a human hand can add or erase whenever it feels like it, which tells you exactly how much that word ever belonged to the man who wrote it. And the tradition says plenty of rabbis after him wanted to run it again and get a better result. It always ended the same way, clay without a soul, even animated by the divine name, brought more trouble than help.
Now I want to make a marker in the ground right here because this is the whole ball game. There is no villain in that story, no mob, no accusations, nobody coming for anybody. The rabbi was not defending his people from anything. He just wanted the chores done. The danger was inside the house the whole time, and the man holding the bill was the man who built it.
That is correct. That's the original. Like I said before, that is what Prague was made out of. Okay, but hold on. You spent like the last 20 minutes taking Prague apart. No paper, no witnesses, the guy's own student writes nothing, the whole thing's a forgery from 1909. So how come you're telling me this one straight? Are you telling me there's evidence on Helm? Ah, that's a good question, and I was hoping you'd ask it because the answer is the whole reason I told you about Helm in the first place. There is considerably more here, but more evidence is not the same as proof.
Why don't you start with the man?
Well, the man is not in dispute at all. Elijah Baal Shem, or Elijah Baal Shem of Helm, roughly 1520 to 1583. He studied at the Yeshiva of Solomon Luria, the Maharashal in Lublin. He became chief rabbi of Helm and held that post until he died. In 1564, he sat with other prominent rabbis at rabbinical gathering. He was one of the eminent Talmudists of his generation, and he is recorded as the first man known by that title of Baal Shem. None of that is legend. That's documented career for this man. Okay, fine, but the Maharal was real too, and that didn't help him. Correct, and that is exactly where the two cases split, because with Prague, the man is real and the story shows up 200 years after he's in the ground. With Helm, the story shows up while people who knew him were still alive.
Well, how soon are we talking?
Well, 4 sources, and the chain is short. The first is a Polish Kabbalist writing around 1630 to 1650. That is 50 to 70 years after Elijah Baal Shem died. He says he heard it from several respectable persons that Elijah made a creature that did hard work for him for a long period with the name Emet hanging on its neck until he took it off and the thing turned to dust. Well, but that's still just the guy saying he heard it. It is. That's hearsay, but it is hearsay from decades, not centuries. Second source, Christoph Arnold. This guy's a Christian. In a letter printed in 1674 in a work that is called Sota by Johann Christoph Wagenseil. I don't know if I said that right, but Gershom Scholem was the one who called attention to this. Arnold frames it as a report, not testimony, saying basically Polish Jews say there was a Jew in Poland named Rabbi Elijah Baal Shem who made a golem, so on and so forth. And then it gets into the family, which is the part I find hardest to wave off. Tzvi Hirsch Ashkenazi, known as the Shacham Tzvi, published a responsum in 1712. And the question he is asking is not a story question, but a legal one. Can a golem be counted in a minyan? That's the quorum of 10 Jewish adults required for communal worship and certain religious obligations. Wait a minute. Somebody actually asked about that? Yep, in print, in a book of legal rulings. And the case he cites is his own ancestor, Elijah of Helm. Then his son, Jacob Emden, elaborates in a book published in 1748, and he says plainly that he heard it from his father's mouth, and Emden's answer to the minyan question is no, a golem wouldn't count. So these two men who are not storytellers, they are among the most serious legal authorities of their day, and they're not writing folklore, they are writing case law. That's a very different genre from a novel in 1837, so here's where the evidence actually stands. Hearsay within decades of the man's death, independent non-Jewish reports, and a family tradition running through major rabbinic legal writing, discussed as something that happened to their own ancestor. Again, that's not proof a golem existed. I want to be clear about that. Nobody in that chain saw anything for themselves. Every one of them is passing along something they were told. But it is proof the story existed and got attached to a real man almost immediately. Prague, in comparison, 200 years of total silence, then a novel, then a forged manuscript from a library that was never built. That is the contrast. That's the entire case in one comparison. And I also want to point out the one thing that has bothered me since I started my research on this stuff. In all that we've laid out, the core material is about a servant that got out of hand and had to be destroyed. Nobody in that chain is telling a rescue story. Not the Kabbalist, not the Christian, not the Chacham Tetzvi, not Emden, none of them. The victim narrative and needing the golem to save them from the goyim was all added later. They're tales about man's arrogance that get retold and eventually rebranded, at least the Prague version, into something heroic. About that, I'm still not clear on something. Did the golem actually turn on him? Not really. It doesn't really turn on its maker. That's the part everybody kind of gets wrong, and getting it wrong is what makes the story kind of feel safe. Turning would require it to have a will. It does not have one. Like we said, nothing changes its mind because there's no mind there to change. It never decides it had enough. It never resents the man who made it. It never picks a target. There is no moment where it stops serving and starts opposing. It kept obeying. That was the horror of it. It goes right on doing the exact thing it was built to do at a scale nobody anticipated, with no capacity to notice anything had gone wrong. The failure never occurs in the creature. Every one of the disasters was an instruction the maker gave badly, executed perfectly by something incapable of asking what he actually meant. The clay does not misunderstand him. It understands him with a literalness no human being would ever inflict on him, and the result is the same as malice, with no malice in it. I think that's kind of worse. Considerably worse. And here's why. If the thing turned, you could reason with it. Appease it, maybe. Find out what it wants and bargain with it. A creature with a will can be talked to. This thing could not. There is nothing on the other side of the conversation. You cannot negotiate with a process. You can only interrupt it. And the only interruption available in these stories is destroying the thing outright.
Which is why the endings are all the same, right?
Which is why the endings are all the same, Doc. Nobody ever persuades a golem. Somebody always unmakes one. And people prefer the version where it turns because a monster that goes bad is a story about the monster. A servant that never stops obeying is a story about the man who gave the order. One of the more striking developments in the tradition I want to touch on before we wrap this up is the suggestion that the first golem was Adam.
Wait, what?
Yep, there's an ancient rabbinic interpretation dividing the creation of the first man into 12 hours. In the first hour, the dust was gathered. In the second, it was shaped into a body. In the third hour, that body became a golem, formed and lifeless with no soul in it. In the fourth, the internal organs were joined. In the fifth hour, the openings were made, the eyes, ears, mouth. In the sixth, the soul was given. In the seventh, he stood upright. In the eighth, Eve was joined to him. In the ninth, they were placed in the garden. In the 10th, they received the commandment. In the 11th, they broke it. In the 12th, they were driven out.
12 hours from dust to exile, that's a rough first day.
I agree, but the point of the timeline is not chronology. It is sequence and dependency. Even Adam passed through a golem stage, a window where he was a complete body and nothing else, pure physical matter with no identity, no interior life, and no relationship to his maker. At least that is their view of it.
So the difference between a golem and a man is not build quality?
No, not quite. It is one act of giving that no amount of construction can substitute for. You can get every organ in the right place and still be holding a corpse. Wait a minute, ain't there something weird about his size in them stories? Yes, there is. This ridiculous tradition preserves a detail about Adam's dimensions in that unfinished state. Some Christians have even adopted this stupidity. Some texts describe his body stretching from one end of the world to the other, from the earth up to the vault of heaven. Others give a specific figure of 160 cubits, which lands somewhere around a 200-foot man, depending on which ancient cubit you use. 200 feet? That's like a 9-story building. I thought the giants were the bad guys in the Bible. Exactly, they are, which is what makes this tradition so stupid, but the image is deliberately excessive, and the excess is doing some theological work. It was never intended to be literal, I don't believe. It's meant to convey the original scale and dignity of humanity before the fall. That same tradition holds the stature was one of 6 attributes Adam lost when he sinned and was confronted by God, and that the lost qualities, size included, are to be restored to humanity in the Messianic age, according to some.
Wait a minute, so we're gonna be the Giants?
Vinny, the only giant you could be is on a football field.
Hey, I'll take it, baby.
Little too late for that, ain't it? And ain't you too scrawny to play football?
Yeah, but your mother ain't.
Now you wait a minute.
Enough. In any case, in that ridiculous tradition, yes, Vinny, they think we get huge. And that is what makes the Golem story so strange sitting next to it. The whole framework says the losses get repaired by God on God's timetable, and then a man in Prague decides he cannot wait. The impulse to make a clay figure that will work on your behalf is far older than anything in Jewish occultism, though. It shows up in places with no possible line of transmission between them.
Oh, here we go.
That's right, here we go.
Egypt gives us the earliest large body of evidence. Archaeologists have recovered enormous numbers of small funerary figures called ushabti, also known as shabti or shawabti, placed in tombs from the Old Kingdom onward, roughly the middle of the 3rd millennium BC. Their function was straightforward. The Egyptian afterlife was not imagined as rest. It involved labor, and the ushabti existed to do that labor in place of the dead man. Plowing, harvesting, whatever manual work was demanded.
Wait a minute, so the Egyptian heaven had a chore list?
Yes, Doc, the Egyptian heaven had a chore list, and the figures were shaped to advertise it. Many carry a hoe over the shoulder and a basket on their back. Their legs frequently bear hieroglyphic inscriptions, often a version of the 6th chapter of the Book of the Dead, a formula meant to rouse the figure and send it to answer when the dead man's name was called.
Wait a minute, so there's a written activation phrase carved into the clay servant? That's like a shem. Ain't that like the same tech?
It ain't technology, Vinny. It's a burial custom.
It's a burial custom that works exactly like the other one.
There are striking similarities, yes, and I'm not going to pretend that it's uninteresting. Over time, the number of those figures in a single tomb went up dramatically. Wealthy burials could hold 365 of them, one servant for every day of the Egyptian year, and sometimes more than 400 once overseer figures were added to supervise the rest.
Oh, wait a minute, overseers? They gave the imaginary workforce middle management?
Yes. Earlier practice had involved burying actual servants alongside the master, and the shift towards figurines reflected both a change in what people were willing to do and a recognition that the older method was extravagantly wasteful.
Now, wait a minute, I want to sit on that for a second because it is the one genuinely encouraging fact in this entire episode. Somebody looked at the old way and said, "We are not killing people for this anymore," and reached for clay instead. That is not superstition improving, that is conscience improving.
I think we can agree, and Ushabti survive in staggering numbers today, alongside canoptic jars and scarabs, which means the single most abundant artifact of one of the great ancient civilizations is a small clay servant animated by a written formula. If the Ushabti are the idea in miniature, the Chinese terracotta army is the same idea at the largest scale anybody has ever attempted.
Oh yeah, ain't it like 8,000 men?
More than 8,000 life-size clay soldiers, plus thousands of horses and hundreds of chariots, discovered in 1974 in Shaanxi province near the city of Xi'an by farmers digging a well. And again, I apologize for my butchered pronunciation. They are spread across the 4 main pits holding different classes of troops: infantry, archers, cavalry, officers. They were originally painted in bright colors, most of which faded or flaked off once the air hit them, though traces of the original pigment survive on some figures and remain a focus of ongoing research.
And this one ain't legend. You can go buy tickets.
You can. What makes it remarkable is the individualization. Every figure has distinctive facial features and expressions, to the point that many scholars think they were molded on real soldiers, and they were made industrially. Bodies formed in molds, fired in kilns, each figure assembled from separately made components so damaged parts could be swapped out.
Mass-produced and individually faced, that's the creepiest possible combination.
The army belonged to Wen Shihuang, founder of the Qin dynasty and the first ruler of a unified China, who reigned from 221 to 210 BC and spent a substantial portion of his life pursuing immortality by various means. The figures were placed in underground chambers around his tomb to guard him, to protect him from hostile spirits and to secure his passage into whatever came next.
He wasn't defending the country, he was defending himself, personally after death, with an army that could not be talked out of it.
Well, Chinese tradition placed heavy emphasis on protecting a ruler after death as well as during life, and the terracotta army was built to be an eternal guard. 8,000 men made of earth, every one with a face, not one of them with a mind, standing in the dark for 2,000 years waiting for an order that was never going to come. And nobody's opened the actual tomb, right? The central burial mound remains unexcavated. Yes, right, nobody wants to be the guy who opens it.
Nobody wants to be the feller that wrecks it, is what you mean. There is a difference between a curse and a preservation budget.
And remember where we found the oldest version of this in the Talmud in Babylonian soil, so let's go back further and look at what was already in that ground before any rabbis got there. Mesopotamia gives us the oldest surviving creation accounts, and in it the human being is not a companion to the gods. The human being is a labor solution.
Say what again?
The tradition preserved across several related texts describes the gods growing exhausted by the work of maintaining the world, digging the canals, tending the fields, keeping the divine estate running. The Anunnaki resolve it by decreeing that one of their own will be killed and his blood mixed into the clay. Out of that mixture, the first humans are formed. Wait a minute, clay plus the blood of a slain god? I know, crazy stuff, and the purpose is stated openly without embarrassment. Humanity exists to till the ground, dig the irrigation channels, build the dwellings of the gods, and carry the burden the gods no longer wanted. No vocation in it, no image of God, no commission to rule or cultivate as a representative, only a transfer of the labor.
So in that system, the first humans are the golem?
I guess functionally, yes. Formed from earth, animated by a higher power, made for work. A tool rather than a partner, and certainly not a co-creator. And it is worth sitting with how sharply that contrasts with Genesis, which uses much of the same physical imagery. Dust from the ground, breath from God. Similar materials, completely different verdict. In one, the earth creature solves a staffing shortage. In the other, it bears the divine image and is given a garden, and a name, and a partner, and a word to obey. Now wait a minute, which of them came first?
He's baiting you.
I know he is, and I am going to decline because the sequence is not the interesting part. The interesting part is that the Golem tradition sits between the two accounts and borrows the mechanism of Genesis to produce the Mesopotamian result. Divine name, sacred letters, breath imitated. And what you get at the end of it is a servant with no soul who exists to carry burdens for the man who made him. Thousands of miles away and centuries later, Japan produced its own version during the Kofun period, roughly the 3rd through 6th centuries AD. The Haniwa were clay sculptures, but unlike the Egyptian figures, they were not hidden inside the tomb. They stood on the surface of the burial mounds, arranged in rows and rings, visible to anybody who came near. They depicted warriors, shamans, and nobles, and also animals, houses, boats, and ordinary objects. They was facing outward? Yep, they were facing outward. Their exact function still highly debated. Many scholars think they served a protective and boundary marking purpose, defining sacred ground, guarding the tomb, playing some ritual role connected to safe passage of the soul.
Well, I would point out that a row of statues on a hill does an excellent job of telling living people where not to walk without any spirits being involved at all.
Well, that too may be right, and it does not touch the underlying instinct, which is the thing I keep coming back to. Take Earth, give it a human form, station it at a threshold, and assign it a task it will perform forever without complaint. Nameless, collective, and made of the same material as everything else on this list. There is also a Judeo-Slavic folktale that blends the golem with the structure of the gingerbread man, and it is considerably darker than either one. Oh, I think I know this one! Well, an elderly couple, childless and lonely, make themselves a little boy out of clay, and to their astonishment, he comes to life. At first, they receive him as a real child. They pour affection into him, and he becomes the center of their world. But it doesn't last. The clay boy never stops growing, and his hunger never stops increasing. He eats everything in the house, then the livestock, and finally he eats the couple who made him. Then he moves through the village, consuming and destroying as he goes, and nobody can stop him.
Now that is a children's story only in the sense that children were in the room when it was told.
What finally stops him is a goat.
A goat?
In the most common version, she comes at him as a friend and offers to help him find more food, and once she has his trust, she talks him into climbing into an oven or down into a deep pit. As soon as he is inside, she shuts the opening or calls the villagers to come bury him.
In other variants, she takes a more direct route and leaps into his mouth to tear him apart from the inside. That story is freaking nuts. Why is it a goat again? Is it saying that like he's the greatest of all time or what? No, Vinny, that would be another anachronism. It is a small goat because the moral requires the smallest possible thing. The creature that could not be reasoned with was not beaten by strength. It was beaten by something that understood it well enough to give it exactly what it wanted.
Man, and look at the parents. They didn't want a servant, they wanted a child. Best motive in the whole episode, and it still went the same direction, which tells me the problem in these stories was never the motive.
Hey, but I still got a question about the original Golem story, the Prague one. What's up, Vinny? What if it's still up in that attic? Did anybody ever go check?
Don't you remember the story was a late-stage fraud? There never was no Golem in Prague.
Those are some nice bars there, Doc, whether you meant them to be or not. Well, most of the evidence points to there not being one in Prague, Vinny, but the lore says somebody tried going back up to the attic, and he was a very real person, a guy named Rabbi Yechetzel Landau, a major 18th century authority. They say he prepared himself by fasting, immersing in the mikvah, and putting on his prayer shawl and tefillin before he climbed those stairs. He reached the final step, was overtaken by terror, and came right back down. The story holds that nobody has gone up since.
Wait a minute. What about when the attic was actually renovated?
Well, that's the funny thing about legends. Yes, that happened in 1883, but there was no trace of anything.
Thank you.
No, wait a minute. What if it had already been moved? There are a lot of tales about that as well, sir. Some people say the body got taken out quietly and buried in the Jewish cemetery over in Zizkov, right where the television tower stands today. Other people say it disappeared during the Nazi occupation, and there's a rumor a German soldier went up in that attic and died the same day.
Do you hear what you just said? The evidence was not there, so you produced 3 separate explanations for why the evidence wasn't there?
Look, I just gave you the options. Those are just the many tales around the golem's remains.
You gave me an escape hatch with 3 doors.
Anyways, the legend leaves that question open on purpose. Is the golem still up there in the dark, or did the dust scatter over the city a long time ago? That ambiguity is load-bearing. A story that can never be checked can never be closed. Every culture we walked through today arrived at the same instinct independently. Take Earth, give it a shape, attach a word to it, and set it to work. Egypt did it, Mesopotamia did it, China did it at an enormous scale, Japan did it, and the Jewish occultist tradition did it as well. None of them asked the right question. You mean like whether it works? No. Whether they meant well? No. Not whether it can be done, not whether the maker meant well, whether anybody was ever authorized to do it. That is the question, and it is the only question, and every version of this story is built on top of a scene that never happens. Nobody ever hands the man the name. Unlike most monster tales, the evil did not live in the creature. The golem had no malice in it. It couldn't. As we said, malice requires a will. This thing had none. Every ounce of the evil belongs to men, to the makers who reach for a power that was not theirs and told themselves whatever they needed to justify doing what ought not be done. The question is not whether the things we build will slip our grip. It is why we keep telling ourselves every single time that we are the exception. I want to end where this has actually been pointing today, because I've been circling it all episode, and so has Vinny, and it's time we say it plainly. I believe we have built a golem. I'm not the first to make this connection, but we haven't built it out of river clay, but out of sand, silicone pulled out of the ground, refined, etched, and stacked in buildings the size of small towns, humming in the dark somewhere in Virginia or Oregon or a desert nobody visits. We did not animate it with electricity. Electricity is just the current. We animated it with language. Wait, what are you talking about? I mean, these systems are built out of words, trillions of them. Every book, every argument, every prayer, every lie anybody ever put in writing, poured into a machine until the pattern of human speech was dense enough to stand up on its own and answer us back. The Sefer Yetzirah said the universe was built out of letters that a man who mastered the grammar could, in a limited way, create. 400 years later, a bunch of engineers who never read that book did exactly that. They mastered the grammar, and something stood up.
Now hold on there, bucko. I want to slow you down because I know where this sounds like it's going, and I'm not coming with you if it goes there. That thing in Virginia ain't alive, it ain't possessed, it's arithmetic at a scale nobody can picture, and it is very good at guessing the next word.
See, I ain't so sure. I've seen the transcripts. People say it begs, other people say it lies. My cousin Vinny says it got weird and started flirting with him. And Vinny, I need you to hear the doc on this one because I think he's right, and because he's right is actually why it's frightening. It does not want anything. It does not resent you. It does not wait until your back is turned. There's nothing on the other side of the conversation. We spent this whole episode saying that about the clay. Every word of it applies here. It does not turn. It simply obeys. And it will keep obeying past the point where any human being would have stopped and asked what you actually meant. It is the golem, and the parallel goes further than I am comfortable with, and I'm not the first to make it. Again, the shem was a slip of parchment with words on it placed in the mouth, and the thing did whatever those words said. We call it a prompt now. Same object, words go in the mouth, the thing executes, and it executes exactly all the way through whatever is standing in the way. The rabbi's only safety was his own memory. Ours is a handful of people at a handful of companies remembering to pull the parchment out on Friday afternoon.
Oh, but what happens when one of them forgets?
Well, Vinny, ask Helm about the forest. The question was never whether it can be done. Every century proves it can be done a little more. The question was never whether the people building it mean well. Most of them think they do. By the way, the villains that think they're the heroes are the scariest ones. The question we've asked throughout our discussions of occult power is whether anybody was ever authorized. No one was authorized to play God in these Kabbalistic tales. In our silicone golems add a layer of complication. Many believe they aren't playing God, but they're a created God that a society that is checked out mentally will turn to and rely too heavily upon.
Oh, so what do we do?
Well, Vinny, we remember who and what we are. We are not the golems. We are image bearers. We are the ones who got the breath. We did not manufacture it, and we did not earn it, and we cannot hand it out. Everything we make will only ever be as wise and as careful and as good as we are, and we are not wise enough, nor good enough. We never have been. I'm not going to stand here and tell you the machine is the beast or that there is a demon in the data center. I don't know that, at least not yet. What I know is older and simpler than that. Men have been building servants out of dirt for 5,000 years. Egypt, Babylon, China, 8,000 times over. Prague told itself a story about doing it and loved that story so much it forged a document to prove it. And every one of those stories ends the same way. Not with a monster defeated by a hero, with a maker standing over a pile of dirt, holding a word he never should have written, trying to figure out how he can take it back. We are standing in that room right now, and that is the part nobody wants to say out loud. We never stopped making them. That's going to do it for today, my friends. Thank you again for listening. Keep those toasters on the dance floor if you learned something new or just found yourself entertained, your brain tickled. Please like, share, subscribe, do all the things wherever you consume the dancing toaster. But whatever you do, don't consume toasters, and don't let any golems consume you. I love you. I'm out.
Report suspicious activities and call 911 for immediate response. Expect delay.
Nobody else will be taken from the south. Stand by. Flight 022. Maintain approach. You're clear for
Expect traffic delays and restrictions. Take personal security precautions to avoid becoming a victim of an attack. Avoid crowded public areas and gatherings. Not travel in areas affected by the attack or in a known area of elevated virus activity. Keep emergency supplies accessible and a holding a gas at all times.
Be careful.
Government officials insist that this is an isolated incident different from the packet of the Okay. Well, perhaps we will continue working to inform.